Good morning. Thank you for joining us. I see people entering our room now. Just go ahead if you have a moment, introduce yourself, say your name and the program that you're with in the chat box so we can get to know who's here with us this morning. Also, make sure in the to section that you're doing it to all panelists and attendees, not just the panelists, so that your peers can see who's present as well. Good morning. I see a lot of familiar faces. Hi, everyone. So good morning. My name is Gina Davis. I am the professional learning coordinator with Team Labor. I'm really excited about this presentation this morning. Hi, Ellen. Good to see you. We have 5 fun ways to engage adult learners here with Kaylee, and we're really excited. Oh, look. Hey, Kaylee, you introduced yourself as well. So we're really excited to share this content with you this morning. And as we continue, we will answer your questions as they become available. So feel free to utilize that chat box as much as you may need. But without further ado, Kaylee, it's all you.
All right, I'm ready. Good morning, everybody. I'm really excited to be presenting here with all of you today. We're going to be talking about 5 ways to engage adult learners. And the way that today's session will go is that we're going to talk about why this is important first, and then we'll get into all the content and just sharing out some ideas. We'll have some opportunities during the presentation to pull up our chat boxes so that we can share our own things that we do in our classrooms. But otherwise, I'm going to be sharing a slew of content with you today. If you happen to be a language arts, science, or social studies teacher, you've hit the jackpot today because I'm giving you a ton of resources. So let's get going. Hopefully everybody's able to see my screen. Here's just a little bit of information about me. I have a master's in instructional technology from University of Nebraska. I did that online, so I never actually went there. And my bachelor's is in elementary from IUP, if you're a Pennsylvania person. I grew up close to there. I taught middle school special ed for 4 years, pre-K and kindergarten special ed for 1.5 years when we moved to Maryland, which was a little crazy. And then I went over to Montgomery County once we got more settled into the area and taught 5th grade, a self-contained classroom there. And then we had our first of 3 boys. We have a 5-year-old, 4-year-old, and an almost 2-year-old boy now. And I knew as soon as my first son was born that I still had to be teaching, even though I was going to stay at home with them. So I interviewed at HCC when my son was 2 months old, and I've been teaching 2 nights a week there off and on since, and doing some other projects for them too. So it's a little bit about me, and my email will be included at the end in case you have questions about this presentation today. I see something coming up in the chat box, Gina, or is that just a entry coming in a little late?
People just saying hi.
Okay, people just saying hey. All right, so for us to get to know one another a little bit better, I thought I would have you do something on Mentimeter. You can use your smartphone to scan this QR code on the screen, or you can go to menti.com and type in this brief code. And whenever you go there, there will be 3 questions for you to answer. I'm going to give us about 1 minute to get settled into doing that, and then we'll share out our responses before we get back to the presentation. I'm going to wait for a few seconds before I switch to our Mentimeter screen so that you can all get this QR code that's on the screen. And I'll do it too. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and switch over to our Mentimeter now so that you guys can see what your responses are. Sorry, I had this pulled up, but it's gone away for the moment. Here we go. All right, so it looks like we've got a variety of people here, a lot of ESL teachers, many GED teachers, some administrators in the room. This is kind of cool to see your responses coming in. Someone who works with Goodwill, that's neat. An acuplacer, I'm not sure what that is, to be honest, but I will Google it as soon as this is over with. All right, it looks like most of you are from Central Maryland, which is where I'm currently viewing from as well. But it's cool to see we have people all over the state. And for our last question, oh wow, most of you are visual learners. Some of you are saying auditory, just a few of you kinesthetic. Personally, I'm a kinesthetic learner. I'd rather just get the materials and do it myself than watch somebody try to tell me how to do it. I'm very hands-on, so awesome. You can go ahead and continue working on that if you're still working on it. You can check back at this later if you're curious about the responses that come in afterward, but I'm gonna keep moving on with our presentation. We have a lot to talk about today. So the reasoning behind this presentation and why this is important is mostly stemming from a really old theory about andragogy that many of you have probably heard about before from a man named Malcolm Knowles. And he started developing this theory back in 1984. I'm not going to read all of this text to you because it is a lot, but the things that we can learn from it is that our learners are more self-directed rather than depending on us. They're not like children that need us to be guiding them all the time on what they should be doing. They have their own experiences that they can bring to our classroom, so it's important to get to know our students well. They're also internally motivated, I say most of the time, because we all have that student who, you know, whose parents made them come to our program and they don't really want to be there. But for the most part, our students want to be in our classes because it's going to literally change their life if they put in the effort for it. Our learners are problem-centered rather than content-centered. They would rather solve a problem than just be given information. And they're also excited to be there most of the time because they're probably getting away from their kids or other stressors of life, and they know that if they're putting in the work that they're going to make progress. Also, in addition to just teaching adults, many of us are teaching part of Generation Z. I started researching this and I went down a rabbit hole because the research on Generation Z is fascinating. I'm one of those millennials, unfortunately, but Generation Z are the people who come after my generation. And it's interesting because this generation of people who are right now ages 9 to 24, they learn a lot differently because they have had technology be part of their lives since they were babies. These were like your 2-year-olds in the grocery cart looking at an iPhone. Or, you know, the people who grew up with social media being part of their lives. And I see we have a question there, Gina. I'll let you handle that in just a moment if you want to do that right now, but I'll finish this slide first. But our Generation Z, they're learning differently. They would rather learn by doing. So even though a lot of us are visual, they are actually a little more hands-on. They'd rather get things and work through them, but they also do benefit from seeing. I had read that this generation loves YouTube videos, which is kind of silly, but it is a way to reach this generation. They don't view social media as a distraction. Like, I know as a millennial, sometimes I think it's very distracting, but the Generation Z has grown up with it. So to them, social media is not separate. It's part of their actual social experience. It's not a separate thing. It's their actual social life. So something else that was really interesting was that they've grown up in a time of algorithms. So everything has been catered to them. And that doesn't mean that they're all spoiled brats. It means that they've literally grown up with things being custom made and designed for them and targeted to them. So that is what they are used to. And so they're not interested in just showing up for class and getting content from us. They're interested in being fully engaged in their learning. And so I thought that that was really interesting, because if our students are now entering college and the workforce are part of this Generation Z, that makes it our responsibility as people not in Generation Z to be able to reach them. Gina, I saw that there was a question that came in. Did you want to do that now or later?
Nope, I think it's something that you'll cover, so no need to worry about it.
Okay, awesome. And finally, now that we got through kind of the boring background, we're going to dive into our techniques. But I have this nice visual to remind us that it's not about us, it's about our students. And if we're always standing in the front of our classrooms, then we need to change something. Our students are internally motivated and they want to be part of their learning process. So we all need to be connecting with one another. We shouldn't always be in the front of our classrooms. We need to step away from our computer screens or our presentations or our whiteboard, whatever we have, and be in the classroom with them, facilitating their learning next to them. So let's dive in. Here's our 5 fun ways to engage, and hopefully these perky colors of this presentation will brighten this up a little for you today. But the 5 fun ways, we have a nice little way to remember it here. Teach, technology integration, encourage movement, apply to real world, classroom discussions, hands and eyes. Some of those sound a little bit weird, but we're going to talk about what they all mean as we go through this. Our first one is my favorite personally, technology integration. And as someone who has a master's in instructional technology, this is one of my favorite things to do, get in techie with it. So the easiest thing for you to do is using virtual quizzes. Many of you are already using virtual quizzes. It was funny, over Thanksgiving break, I was sitting with my nieces and nephew who are both in college, and they were both talking about Kahoot and how much they love Kahoot, even though they've done it a million times. So most of you are familiar with Kahoot, but that's a really easy one that you can use in your classrooms. Now, some of you don't have students that are able to have cell phones in the classroom for one reason or another. And there is one of these virtual quizzes that you might be able to use that I wanted to point out. So if you're all able to see my screen, I'm going to have you join me looking at this comparison guide. This is cool because it takes the guesswork out of it for you. It tells you a little bit about Kahoot, but it also tells you about other online formative assessments that you might want to explore in your classroom. Quizzes is one that I'm going to go and talk about more in depth, just because it's my personal favorite, even more than Kahoot. But another one that I wanted to point out to you that's on this list is called Plickers. I have not used this in my classroom, but I talked to one of our instructors who does use it. She was teaching in a situation where her students did not have smartphones. And she said that with Plickers, she was able to use it in her class by giving her students little cards that have almost looks like a barcode on it. But she would pose a question to them and they would hold up their barcode with the choice of the answer that they're choosing. And she takes her cell phone and just kind of takes it across the room to scan. And that was a way that she was able to do quick assessments with her students. It would take the data from that and put it on her smartphone so that she could see how her students were answering. She did say that it does get a little expensive because you have to print a card for each individual student and laminate them so they don't get destroyed. But if you don't have smartphones in your classroom or the capabilities for that, Plickers may be an option for you. My personal favorite, though, is quizzes. So I'm going to get us back into this so we can look at it. And here's actually a screenshot on there of what the quizzes board looks like. It's kind of not the best shot. I was taking it in my class one night. But the pink are questions the student got incorrect, and the teal is what they answered correctly. Now, I will say, I think I'm on there and I was purposely answering things incorrectly so that I could see what it does. So there's a little more pink on there than there probably should be for certain people. But quizzes.com is awesome because it's similar to Kahoot if you've used Kahoot before, but it's student driven. The students get their questions on their smartphones. So they go, just like to Kahoot, to the quizzes site, and they have a little code to put in, but then they get the questions on their phone. They work at their own pace. So you're not standing in front of your classroom going through it with all of your students. They're actually looking at it on their phone, doing it at their pace. And I hadn't been a student doing Kahoot before until last week. We had a presentation at HCC at Howard Community College, and the guy did a Kahoot at the end, and I was a student for it, and I did terrible. And one of the reasons was that I was trying to look at the screen and then look at my phone to match the colors. So the true false I got wrong every time because I would get mixed up with the colors. Like I would always think like I associated true with one of the colors, but it wasn't the right color. And also just going from the screen to my phone visually with someone who has some visual issues, that was really hard for me. So that's one reason I love quizzes, is that it's on their phone. Another perk of quizzes and Kahoot is that the games are super easy for you to customize. If you've been teaching for a while like I have, you probably have reached the point where you just don't want to make things anymore. Like I'm over making my own stuff. I don't want to reinvent the wheel. I want to find someone else's assessment that they worked hard on and then customize it for my class. That's exactly what both quizzes and Kahoot allow you to do. So you can take a set of pre-made questions and you can use that for your students, or you can edit it for your students and then give those to them so that they can answer those quizzes. I'm going to click on quizzes real quick just to kind of give you a little peek of what the website looks like. You can see I'm sort of logged into my account right now, but let's say you wanted to teach your students about main idea. I feel like that's an easy one to work on. You can go through here, you can find one that matches with the grade level of your class that you're targeting, not their actual grade level. Let's say you wanted to check this one out. You could use it as a live game for your students, or they could even practice this on their own. You can edit the quiz. There's a lot that you can do. And something else that my students love about quizzes is when they answer a question, so let's say they get this question done, it brings up this really stupid, like animated graphic that lasts for like 2 seconds, but it's kind of dumb, but it's great for connecting with that Generation Z that literally lives in that animated, entertaining life. So have fun with this. Don't go off on a tangent and do it right now during the presentation, but I hope that you'll find quizzes helpful. Many of you probably love presentations or use presentations, and that's fine. But for us to connect with our students, we need to tweak it a little bit. So, sorry, let me get caught up here with my printout. I wanted to give you some ways to spice up your presentations so that they are more in tune with our learners. A fun thing to do is just adding relevant music or YouTube videos whenever possible. You can pause during your presentations to do something called a turn and talk, which is a super common teaching strategy that you may or may not have heard of. We're going to talk about it more in depth later because a lot of times turn and talks are done very poorly or incorrectly, and then they're not as effective. You could have your students text you about something that they learned. And if you don't give your phone number to students, you could use the Remind app, which allows them to sort of text you without having your personal information. Or you could have them write a little short tweet summary on paper. So during your presentation, you might have them summarize what you've talked about in 100, I think Twitter's like 144 characters. I don't even know what it is right now. It's short, but just a few characters about what you have written. Somebody's probably correcting me in the chat box right now. I don't tweet. Another thing that we did at the beginning was Mentimeter. I just learned about this last week and I wanted to try it out. But you can actually put entire presentations in Mentimeter to engage with your students, or you could add the clouds, questions, polls, quiz questions, whatever. Now, it's free to join and it's free to do what I did with all of you today. That was free for me. But if I wanted to import this presentation into Mentimeter, or if I wanted to add a bigger quiz, I would need to pay for it. And it has all the pricing on the website. But as a little activator, I think that was fun too, just sort of try it out. Another thing you can do if you have your students doing slideshows is just come up with a supplemental handout for it. And a lot of times online, you can find handouts that are already made. A while ago, I found this cool energy slideshow on SlideShare, but it's like 46 slides long, which is really long. I knew I didn't want to stand up in the front of my classroom and go through 46 slides with my class about energy. And I mean, it's a good presentation. It's got a ton of pictures. It's well organized, but that's a lot of content for them to get through without being engaged. So what we did was we used this as part of our learning rotations, which we'll talk about later. And I also created a handout for them to use while they did it. So this handout had some fill in the blanks, and because it was 46 slides, I did give them slide numbers to help them find where those blanks would be located, but then they had to sort of take it up a notch by comparing some of the types of energy, and also at the end, they separated from their partner to do a little essay to choose which one that they felt was the most important. So if you are doing something like that, just make sure that you're coming up with a way for students to be fully engaged in the process. What we're doing right now, where I'm presenting and mostly talking, I would not do in my classroom, but I think it works well for what we're doing right now. So now I have a question for you guys. You can pull up your chat box in a moment again. Make sure that you have it so that everyone is able to view, because if you don't change the settings in the little drop-down box, only Gina will be able to view. So if you pull up your chat box, just make sure it says all panelists and attendees. But I'd like you to answer this question. What's your favorite way to integrate technology, or what obstacles do you face integrating in your classroom? And we'll just take a moment to check out some of the responses. So it sounds like some of you use Kahoot, surveys, PowerPoint. Some of you are using YouTube. All right, that's good. Students may take a huge amount of time. I'm assuming that's about the quizzes. You can also set timers on it, even though it's self-paced. Teaching in a jail, yes. I was thinking about you guys when I was talking about quizzes and Kahoot. Cell phones, okay. Some people are asking for more training on the Remind app. We've got Khan Academy, Tabe Academy. I'm not sure what some of this is, how to get SS to find websites. Oh, one thing, I think Gina may have sent it to you. If not, you'll get it at the end, but you're going to get a whole handout with all these links that I'm going through today. Okay, so it sounds like there are some difficulties, but some of you sound like, thank you, Caroline. It sounds like the students get the links from quizzes and Kahoot they just kind of like you guys got with Menti. You type in the website that you give them, which is short. It'll be like kahoot.it or quizzes.com, and then you get usually a 6-digit code that they type in. It takes like 5 seconds. Gina, I don't know about that question from Caroline. Can we get copies of the group chat?
Caroline knows how to reach me. We're good.
Okay, you're good? Okay. Yeah. All right. I'm going to go ahead and keep moving on. You guys have some great input on that. So let's keep going. Our number 2 is making sure we're encouraging our movement. So getting our students out of their seats. Now, some of them may have worked a full job. I teach 2 nights a week. So when my students come to me, most of them, especially at the higher level where I'm preparing them for their GED, most of them already have full-time jobs. Some of them commute from over an hour, hour and a half away. And here in the Ellicott City, Columbia area, like some of you in Montgomery area, traffic is awful. So some of our students have sat in traffic for an hour to get to our class. Some of them might have been at home with their kids all day, and this is like their vacation. I don't know, but we need to get them out of their seats. Some of them may also have not even eaten dinner because they were trying to make it to class on time. Also, I'm not an evening person, but I teach in the evenings. Like, I am very much a pop out of bed in the morning kind of girl. So in the evenings, I need to be exciting and get students moving because I am like tired then. And I'm at home with 3 little boys all day, so I'm like done. So it's important for your students and for you. So let's talk about some ways to do that. We have to use worksheets in our classrooms sometimes. Like, we are preparing our students, most of us, for taking a GED test. So they need to get used to seeing the content and what it looks like, and they need to get used to be reading lengthy texts and answering questions about the text. So worksheets are an important thing that we should be using. But sometimes we want to spice it up a little bit just to get them out of their seat. So here are 2 games that I currently use in my classroom to do that. One of them is called Four Corners, and it could really be used with any worksheet, but it can also be used for what you call an anticipation guide, a pre-reading activity, for those of you who teach language arts. But you can put A, B, C, D in the 4 corners of your classroom. I usually just use note cards or Post-its. Like, I literally carry a bag full of pens, Post-its, note cards, tape, staples, whatever I might need for my class at any given point, so that I can always reach in there and pull out whatever I need. It looks like a diaper bag sometimes because you're prepared for anything, but it's helpful for when you need an on-the-fly, get them out of their seat activity. The students would walk to the corners to maybe answer questions, or if it's a pre-reading activity or a pre-learning activity, they might walk to the corner, go to A if you think this might happen, or go to B if you think this might happen. You could use it for true, false, or yes, no. Just give them 2 options to walk to in your classroom. It sounds a little elementary, and as you know, because I told you my background is elementary, but my students like it. I've used it with all my adults. Some of them are older than me, and I think that they look forward to the opportunity to get out of their seat. And I typically pose it to them as, okay, guys, this is going to be a little bit silly, but let's get up and get energized. And they always do it with me. In my 5-ish years of being at HTC, I've never had a student refuse to do it. They've always done it with a smile and had fun. But my students really love is tic-tac-toe. Now, you guys all know, like, the kid game tic-tac-toe. So this is simple, and this is actually what students are doing in this picture here. You can kind of see the grid on the board, and I have like the X's are this team and the O's is this team. You could have a couple grids if you have a really big class. My class this past semester was one of my smallest classes I've ever had. But my student teams, they worked on sections of an activity that they had printouts of. I also had color copies for them so that they could look at some of the things like the periodic table in color. But what they did was they would work through a section of text. Like, you know, on your GED, you might have one reading passage, but then you have 3 questions that follow it, or you might have a chart with 2 questions that follow it. I split those up ahead of time into chunks, so that the graph and the 2 questions that go with it, they're all sort of in a box together, and I just write those on there. If I'm using something in a workbook, sometimes I'll just have students draw a line and be like, okay, these things go together, these things go together. But they work with their partners that are in their class with them. They have to all agree on the answer. So that's where it gets a little tricky, and that's where students do a really good job with debating, because they'll talk together about what the correct answer is. They can always call me over to help them through the question, but the students raise hands when they all agree on the answer. Sometimes that takes me to get them to that point, not all the time. And then if it's correct, they get to go put an X or an O on the board, and we continue doing this until one of the teams gets 3 in a row. Once they get 3 in a row, we erase it and we keep going till we're through whatever we need to do. It's just a fun way to make worksheets a little more exciting and interactive, and they get really competitive with it. So they love it. It's also a cool opportunity for students to pick out strengths. One other thing I forgot to note, I don't make them go in a certain order. So they can look through their packet or their workbook and they can pick out, oh, hey, let's do this reading passage. This doesn't look too hard, or I'm really good at maps. Let's do the map questions. They get to pick the order they go in. So I'm not directing them about that. I'm more of facilitating their conversations, correcting their answers, and just kind of being the chaos calmer if any situations arise. Another of my favorite ways to get the students up is something you might use already called learning stations. And this is like really valuable for those of us who are teaching science and social studies related things, because there's so much content. But the class that I teach right now, it sort of blends language arts, science, and social studies. I do not have enough time to get through everything that's taught on the GED test, but my goal is always to expose them to some of the content so that when they get to their test, they don't freak out over all the vocabulary that they're not familiar with. So this is a little image here of what my Canvas setup looks like if any of you do use Canvas. If you don't have computers or technology in your classroom, you don't need a fancy Canvas setup to do this activity. You just need organization. You could put everything in folders. You could have little note cards that you put around your room denoting numbers. This is where activity 1 will go. This is where you'll go to do activity 2. This is where activity 3 will be. So it doesn't have to be computer-based. Mine just happens to be a lot of the time. I do this different ways. Sometimes my students get 3 activities and they have to complete all 3 of them before class is over. Sometimes I present 3 activities to them and I always model all of them first, but then I tell them pick 2. So they get to pick out what their needs are because they might already know how to do something. Another way is that I tell them they need to do all 3, but they can go out of order. So again, this varies depending on what we're going through that night, where my students are, and we'll talk again about how to know where our students are in a moment. But here are some examples of the types of things. I'm not opening this one right now because I'm having some flash issues on my computer, but those of you who can open it later. It's really cool. But this is a really awesome human body interactive if you're somebody who teaches science, where you can actually use these sliders to slide in different parts of the body systems, and you can read about them and how they work together and what parts are in that. The students just thought this was really awesome because you just have so many options about what you want to learn about, and it's fun to watch. But along with that, there were some riddles that I had cut out ahead of time, and they had to pick 2 of these riddles and figure out which 2 body systems were working together. So that was one of the activities that night that we were learning about some different life science related things. And you can kind of see how I organized it in Canvas. That way they didn't have to be going and typing all these links in. The links were already there. I had this particular night, I had 3 laptops in the classroom that they could rotate to, so that all they needed to do was have Canvas logged into to be able to access what they needed. Anything that was printed, I denoted on there that it was printed so that they weren't like trying to click on it and figure it out. Also a way to organize, and this could work for any of you, whether you have computers in your classroom or not, is just giving your students an organizational tool so that they know what they're doing that night and what's expected out of them. But this is kind of where I described all of our activities that we would do, so that if during the modeling they came to class late or they drifted off, hopefully they didn't, but let's say they did, or they just missed something, they can go back to their agenda and look at it. I typically post it on my whiteboard, but students can always access this on Canvas also. That way, if they came in late or something and it's not up there anymore, they can get to it. I used to print it out for students, but I've kind of have gotten away from that more recently. Another thing that you can do is gallery walking. And I'm not talking about like in elementary school where you would just get up and go see everybody's artwork. This is a little more higher level gallery walking. You can use it to share completed work like writing and things like that. But you can also use it for taking notes. Let's say you have a lot of notes that you need students to take on a certain topic. They can go around to a computer to get some notes from a slideshow. They might go to the wall and take some notes from an organizer that you have. They might go to another area of the room where you have some problems that they have to solve based on their notes. So it might not technically be a gallery walk, but that's the best way I could think to describe what I was trying to tell you to do. It works really well for math problem solving too, to have different problems around the room that students can walk to. Just tape them on the wall and have them go around the room with their little paper and write their answers down. And one final way to get them up and moving is to use models with students. I saw that somebody is doing some like marshmallow baby thing today, and there's some cell thing going on for these virtual trainings, but you can also use this in really anything that has a system or a process. So you could use this strategy in math, It works great in science, but I used a social studies example that I had found a couple years ago to show you guys what I'm talking about. For this activity, you would give students note cards that they would hold. So this is all about voting rights. So one of them might be white woman. One of them might be African-American male. There's all kinds of different things, 17-year-old, I don't know. You give the cards out to your class, and then the teacher reads the script, and the students move to the could vote, cannot vote sections of the room. So we modeled throughout history how voting rights have changed, because sometimes people would get voting rights and then they would change. So students have a lot of fun with that. And it's just, again, getting them out of their seats. But this is a quote that I really liked. It's basic, but it says to learn, students need to do something. So just get them out of their seats, get them busy doing something. Wanted to point out this comes from a site called Cult of Pedagogy, and this is more for elementary, middle, high school teachers, but it's an awesome blog resource if you're looking for great professional development. They also show you how to do some really cool grouping activities on there. Our third one, applying to real world. I'm going to skip this for right now just for time so that I can go through some of these other things with you. These are some note cards that I've used in my class with my students. I do this the first day of class just to get to know them, because if we want to be applying our content to their lives, we have to know them really well. So this just usually tells me a little bit about them. I find out their favorite snacks, what movies and music they like. But two of the most important questions I always ask is, what's something that you want to tell me about yourself that I might need to know? And I give them an example, like, I have a terrible attention span. So I will let them know that's what I would put on my card. So my teacher knew that I'm going to need to be engaged in my learning, or I'm going to be daydreaming. So sometimes they write something like that. It was interesting. I was looking at these cards at the end of my semester, and the student said he gives up easy. He actually didn't make it through class. He did give up. And this student said he couldn't stay focused for very long, so some things may be harder for him. And he did stay through to the end of my class, but he did have a hard time focusing, so we got him out of his seat a whole lot. You know, he had a lot going on in his life, so I did what I could to help him focus. And the yes for number 8 is asking if they have smartphones, so that you know right off the bat if you can use things like Kahoot and quizzes with your class. A few other things that we do the first class is we find someone who. This is something that you all have now a handout for, but you give this to all of your students, and they go around the room and try to find people who can initial in these boxes. And it's some of it's important stuff, like, I don't know, has a baby, like that. I would want to know that about my students, if they had a baby or if they had a full-time job. But some of it's just silly things, like has a tattoo, has driven a boat. It's for fun. It builds rapport in our class, and the better rapport we have with our students, the more they're going to want to come to class and the more they'll engage with us. It also helps us know about them. So it helps us know like what things they might know about, like knows all the steps in the scientific method. That one's kind of lame, but it's also sort of fun. They initial in the boxes if that one describes them. And then at the end, we always have a conversation about it. Like if somebody said that they ran a race or something, we would talk about, oh, what race did you do? How far did you go? Just to build that little classroom community. We talked about the student information cards. We do a weekend review every week during the first class meeting, where I'm just like, what'd you do over the weekend or since the last time we saw each other? And students tell me one thing. It does take time, yes, and I know our time is valuable, but it's important for us to know our students if we're going to teach them well. And something else you can do is obviously journaling in your class. It helps their writing, but it also can give you some insight into them. And they can be topics about their learning, but they can also just be informal topics about what they did during the week or what their job is like. And then I gave you a couple of my favorite real world content resources and ideas. So the first part of this one sort of talks about knowing our students. And the second part's talking about knowing them well enough to know what in the real world do they need to know about. Because if we know them well, we can teach them well. So if we're using resources that are relevant to their lives, they're going to understand it better, they're going to connect to the content better. That's kind of an obvious given. But another benefit that they'll reap, especially for our students who maybe moved here from another country or who kind of quit high school at a young age and never really got too involved in the democratic process or things like that, it's going to help them to be more a part of our society because they will be up to date on current events and know some things. Like I was really surprised at how my students didn't know who our vice president was. And they didn't know that the president was being talked about for possible impeachment. They didn't know the branches of government. So I'm not going to click all of these links, but these are on your resource worksheet for you. But some of my favorite ones that I've used is this impeachment article. I just used it to teach main idea. So you can find anything on Newsela, which I know is a favorite website probably for a lot of us, in any reading level that they give you, and use it to teach your students whatever the goal is that you have for them. And this is my favorite thing I did lately, where if you teach language arts, you know about the dreaded language arts extended response essay. I found 2 articles about Donald Trump's impeachment and really shortened them a whole lot. And then they had to answer an extended response essay question based on those articles. And I skewed it because I knew my students and I knew that some of them were automatically going to pick the article that talked about why Trump's foreign policy wasn't good, which was funny. One of my students was answering her essay and she was like, yeah, I didn't even read the first one. And I was like, whoa. Okay, this is exactly why we're doing this activity. Because when you take the language arts GED test, you cannot pick the side that you agree with. You have to pick the side that has the strongest argument and say why it has the strongest argument. So oftentimes I'll use real world content and skew it a little bit because I know my students and I know what they're going to want to side with, just because it's going to help teach them better and it teaches them a little bit about our current events that are happening right now. Here are some guiding questions to help you while you're doing your lesson planning, so that we can make sure that our teaching is real world centered for them and that we're meeting what they actually care about and need to know about a topic. So instead of just asking us, what do they need to know? Here are some great guiding questions, like why should they care about it? What benefits will they get from it? How does this topic help them in life or professionally? And what experience will enable students to most easily internalize it deeply. So thinking about how we're going to get them to get to this concept rather than just what do they need to know. Those are some good questions to ask yourself while you plan. All right, number 4, our turn and talks. So have you ever been in a workshop or something and the presenter's talking and then they're like, okay, talk to your table about what we just said. And you look at everybody in your group and you're all like, I don't know, I was spaced out for the last 10 minutes. Does anybody know what we're supposed to talk about? I mean, that's happened to me like many times because like I told you, I don't have a very good attention span. And if I'm not engaged, I'm out. So turn and talks are great though, because they can be engaging when they're done well. You can use them before instruction, during instruction, or after. But basically, it's just what it sounds like. You turn to the person next to you. Sometimes I tell students, go across the room to someone who's not beside you and talk about this. But you can use it for a variety of things. If your students are looking like their eyes are glazing over a bit, get them up, say stand up, walk across the room, find someone not next to you and talk about blah, 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 whatever it is. You could use it for talking about things that are good debates, for discussion, agreeing and disagreeing, or just, especially for your ESL students, if you gave them some new vocabulary or some new sentences to practice, having them practice those with a partner out loud, rather than just practicing them with you as the teacher in the front of the classroom. But a lot of times these are implemented poorly. Like I gave the example earlier where the expectations aren't clear, but there are ways that you can make it good. One of the things that you can do is to make sure your expectations are clear. And how to do that is you could write the question on the board that they need to discuss, or you could give them a sentence starter. Just say, I feel that the blah, 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 blah is and, have the students fill it in while they're talking with their partners. You can also teach them that the first idea isn't always the best. And if you have a good rapport with your class, like we talked about, then you're going to have students who feel safe making mistakes in your classroom, which is a great place to be in. If they feel safe in your classroom, that's awesome. But if you've taught them that the first answer isn't always the best, then you're not going to have every student saying, I agree with Kaylee, I agree with Gina, because the first answer that somebody said might not have been the best one. At the end, you can analyze the responses and see, oh, these ones made the most sense, just so that you're getting high quality answers in all of that. And students are hearing what the high quality answers would be. And the key is providing enough time to talk, but not too much time so that they get off topic. And jigsaw groups is another discussion way that I love. This is an old school elementary idea again, but it works great with adult learners. You can use jigsaw groups with any content that you can break up in chunks, but it works awesome when you have a large amount of content to get through and don't want to make students read every little word of something. I have an example here about how we used it with the scientific method. And if you've never done jigsaw groups, there's a how-to video that you can look at later that's also on your resource handout. But everybody gets a small amount of content that they read with their group that also has the same content. They learn it really well, take notes on it really well. I usually go check in with the groups, and then we split the groups up so that you take the experts in that content area and you pair them with people that don't know about that content area from all the other groups, and they share out their information. So here's our little scientific method example. Let me scroll down here through this one that I have so you can see the actual example. But they all had different steps that they had to read about and take some notes on. Each group did. They took their little notes in their section and then they shared it out with the rest of the groups so that they could get what all the other steps were. This has been a favorite activity for a lot of them. But each group just had a short one-page passage to read about it. We'll skip that too. And number 5, our last one, hands and eyes, show it to help them know it. This one, I didn't know what to call this. This is a weird name for it. But really, this is just helping out our kinesthetic learners and our visual learners, the people who really need to see things and experience them to learn. So for example, I love color and color coding. You can probably tell by my presentation and maybe my scarf. But these students had questions that were highlighted with certain colors. As you can see here, these are all different color that their numbers are highlighted with, and they had to go in the passage and find information in the text to help support their answer. Easy to do, doesn't take a lot of work on your part. Just need some highlighters. Again, you can carry it in that little arsenal of stuff that you take to your class where you're prepared for anything. So that's one of my favorite ways to use color coding, but you can also use it for content that involves specific steps and assign certain colors for each step. And you can also use it for rubrics. If you're familiar with the language arts extended response essay and you're a teacher for that class, you know that the scoring guide is like 140 pages. Like, it is ridiculous the amount of little details that they need to be able to do for that. And the rubric for the extended response is completely overwhelming. So I made a little student-friendly one that I'm sharing with all of you. So if you're a language arts teacher, you can copy this and edit it all you want, where they actually go through and they find the different parts and they highlight the different parts. We do it in their own essays. We do it with my essays that I've modeled for them. They do it with peer essays. So they get a lot of exposure to finding these parts and coloring them in the text. And then they have questions at the end to also answer about it. So this is something that's super helpful, and it sort of condenses the 140 pages of detail that we get as instructors to something much more student-friendly for our students. I see a lot of questions coming up maybe for that. So we'll talk about that later. And our last thing that we're really going to talk about today, because we want to especially reach that Generation Z, is some great video and visual sources. If you teach science, this is key for you guys. Amoeba Sisters, it's amazing. It's basically like all high school science, and it's awesome. But everything's cartoony, so everything on this site, you scroll down, it's all sorted by topic. It's all free. The only thing you pay for is the answer key, which I think is kind of dumb, because if I'm going to give my students something, I'm going to make sure that I know how to do it first. So if you want to pay for the answer key, like if you're like, oh crud, I didn't plan my lesson well tonight, I need something else, go pay the $1 or whatever the answer key is. But if you planned ahead of time, let's say you want to teach them about enzymes, you can get the free video, which is on YouTube, and they're all cartoony and awesome. Well, now we have a wonderful ad that I don't want to watch. Let's skip that here. But I'll just kind of scan through it so you can sort of see what it looks like a little bit. Got all these cute little figures explaining very technical things. And there's worksheets that are made to go with all of them, which are really great because there's some note taking, but there's also some higher level thinking that goes into these, which I love. Some of these are very hard for me to do. Like I really have to, focus and work hard on these. So this is an awesome resource for you. Read, Write, Think has printable graphic organizers, so you don't need to make your own. One of my favorite things if you teach science is this Earth, Sun, Moon interactive. I will not click on it right now because at the beginning of it, it has this meteor thing that takes like 20 seconds to get through before it gets to the actual educational portion. But later on, definitely click that. Here are some guiding notes that I would make to go through something, go along with something like that, that has some notes for the students to take and also a little bit of an application piece at the bottom where they compare and contrast. And the last website I want to point out to you is one that I just recently stumbled upon that comes from Florida. Sorry, I'm having some issues making that go away. But here we go. Well, it's down by where my little mouse is. Hopefully that comes up. This is a great resource for ABE, GED, and ESL instructors because there's tons of already made lesson plans on here. And I have found a lot of them to be very visual and hands-on and interactive, but I just kind of wanted to skim through. You can see how nice this organizer is. These are already made for you. You can just print them out and use them in your class. So I would highly recommend checking out that website for some fun and engaging activities. But that's really all I have for you today. If you have further questions, you're welcome to email me. My email is on this presentation, and you will also get this presentation and the handout with all the links so that you can go and explore your little heart out. Gina, you want to take it over?
Yeah, thanks so much, Kaylee. That was wonderful. We did have a couple of questions that I think that were good to talk about just briefly. Somebody asked, can you give me some good ways, like I think it was around your number 2, which now I can't remember what it was, but differentiating. So if you have learners at different levels and you're separating them into different groups, I believe it was that. Yes, yeah. Moving. Yeah. Mm-hmm. How do you reiterate that the different levels are learning what you've asked them to learn?
Okay, so a lot of it depends on the content and the students, because there's some activities where I want students to be together based on certain levels. Like if we're doing learning stations, I might put students who I know a lot about that particular area together so that if they're going through them together, they can skip over things that they don't necessarily need to know. And I might say, hey, I think your group should start with this activity. So I may guide them toward that. But for other activities, like this one, for example, where they were doing the tic-tac-toe, we did have mixed ability grouping for that activity. And what I do as the facilitator in that is I would go around to the students because they all have to agree on it, but I don't want to make sure that students are just saying, I agree with what Braden said. Mm-hmm. So I would say, oh, hey, Jorge, can you show me where in the text that answer came from? Or can you explain to me why you guys chose that answer? And I would pick somebody else in the group to maybe explain it to me. That way no one's off the hook, so that everyone is engaged in the learning process. And they know ahead of time that everyone is fair game to ask for a question. So that's why it's important for them to talk together while they're in the group so that everyone is on board and understands what they're talking about. And if I ask somebody and they explain it and they really don't actually get it, then that's where the teacher steps in and further explains something or shows them how to do it. Sometimes we even need to pull up a YouTube video if it's something really complicated, just to give them an extra visual of what we talked about. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, that was very thorough. Thank you. Thank you. As Kaylee mentioned, her presentation is going to be uploaded to, well, I think it's already uploaded to the Virtual Training Institute website. A recording as well as the handout is already there as well. I just put a link to the feedback survey in the chat box. If you'll take 1 minute to fill it out, it's very short, just so we can get some feedback on how today went and you know, how to do more or these sessions differently in the future. So we really, really appreciate your time with that. Proof of participation can also be accessed at the end of the Institute on the website as well. But if anyone has any questions, you know how to reach us, and we hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you so much, Kaylee.
Thank you, guys.